As a lead-in, this is Whiteboard Wednesday was a concept we developed as part of this overall push, if you like, to utilise all the various mediums we have by which we can actually communicate with people outside of the club, but actually even found that people internal to the club have appreciated the sort of feedback we're getting. I get players' parents who'll come to me and say, look, they're enjoying watching the Whiteboard Wednesdays, they're getting a better insight into the thinking behind the club, and I think our supporters are certainly getting that. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Obviously, it can, and it's deliberately focused on people who are looking at the business aspect and application of the learnings to their own organisations, but also looking at the thinking behind the thinking in regard to context for key decisions the club actually makes. So the frameworks I'm going to present today, when I came in, I thought I'd present basically exactly what we now present to our staff in regard to people having and establishing that understanding. Two of the frameworks, which I'll talk about just briefly, have already been talked about in the Whiteboard Wednesday, but they're important in the context of what I'm going to discuss in regard to strategy. The fundamental thing that I look to do is, I'll put a line through one thing. There's no mission statements, okay? I don't want to have debates where you're arguing about apostrophes and stuff like that. So people say, what's the mission of the Melbourne Football Club? I sort of go, duh. Well, the mission is we want to produce really good footy teams. We want to win premierships. We want to have people really loving and feeling close to the organisation. We want to be respectful and understand that the most important heritage of our football club is the heritage which is within our supporters. For without that, we don't exist. Those sort of things, you can sit there and you could write a length of this table full of things that we're about and what we are. But I reckon most of it is relatively intuitive, particularly in that environment. So no, there's no mission statements. There needs to be a sense of vision, but again, no vision statements. Okay, the vision comes from building, if you like, a narrative or a storyline of which people can in fact relate to, and deliberately utilising and using words which relate to your industry, because people reference those things and understand those things. And so in terms of building the storyline, and we say, okay, well, what's Melbourne's thing now? What do we want? Well, we say we want to be the club of the decade. We want to be the great success story of the next 10 years. And that's so therein lies the start of a storyline and all the things which you actually create to build it. The next phase we then talk about is, okay, let's understand our business, and therefore the establishment and the building of a profit model is fundamental, and I'll talk about that. And then ultimately I look at the critical component of strategy I see is the best management of scarce resources, if you like. And the most scarce resource people tend to obviously focus on is dollars, but scarce resource is everywhere in a footy club. So this is called the red and blueprint. Again, deliberately utilising terminology which is emotive, okay? Not over the top, not silly, but just emotive. We all relate to the red and blueprint, but the nature is this is a strategy, but it's about future now. It's about building something, and what we do now will have a critical response in regard to how we evolve into this. This was a framework which I utilised, I talked about in one of the very earliest Whiteboard Wednesdays. This is the core of the storyline, if you like. This is what we utilise to build that thing, referencing everything that we do against the heritage of the club. The heritage of the club is beautiful, it's rich, it's all these sorts of things, but it's also left us with, in reality, some competitive disadvantages. We've ended up with a small supporter base, as an example. We've ended up having, at 152 years down the track, still trying to find a place to train, which has got goalposts and line markings and no possums and rats. So for all the strengths and the beauty of what the Melbourne heritage is, this is almost like a situation analysis, but it's also a signpost for us. And we're quite deliberately, almost in a romantic way, referring back to a heritage in most things we do. For example, presenting number 31 to Tom Scully. Presenting number 4 to Jack Watts actually brought to life Norm Smith. I don't think many Melbourne people would have known that Norm Smith wore number 4 for Melbourne, but people do now and understand what the richness of all that is. The fact that we really push the Anzac tradition. Melbourne lost 21 players in war. That's an unbelievable thing. And so we talk to our players about what that means. We talk to the person who comes second in the best and fairest and say, that name Sid Anderson has a context. 3 premierships, died at 22 or 23 in Papua New Guinea. Remember it and understand it, because it's part of what we are. That relates to the ethos. The ethos is the values, the behaviours, the stuff that we just talked about with David in many ways. But again, I've got to reference the heritage. All those things then become decision points for how we go about decisions, which is what we're talking about today: strategy, people, processes, all those sorts of things as it works in. We fundamentally make decisions in regard to our brand, our team, the resources we need to do what we do, and the community. Community is a critical component of what we are. Community is a key part of how we develop our people, but actually how we get a sense of ourselves. And for Melbourne, that's been a bit elusive. We grew out of a stadium, not a suburb. We're a bit different from that point of view. And ultimately, we leave a legacy, and it's a circular thing, and the story just keeps going around and around and around. But building that narrative right from the outset is important, and I think most Melbourne people would be starting to sense now how we're referencing back as part of our going forward. And the terminology we use again is heritage and hope. It's about referencing the heritage, but it's also building hope. But hope is quite quickly for us turning into expectations as well, and that's a really healthy time and an important phase for us to manage. So that's the story. That's the part that we use to build the actual storyline. The next question I always ask someone is, tell me about your profit model. And profit model is not this one-dimensional how we suck the goodness out of our customer base. Our profit model is what we actually need to do to build the business, create the business, and drive it the way that we want to. And again, similar words are utilised. Probably a bit hard to see them at the back there, but if we're building the profit model, it's a question of all the trade-offs and decisions we have to make in regard to these things. And this says custom, people, brand, strategic relationships, community, operations. They're all our team in our case. And so they're all things, if you like, that we have to say, okay, are we going to invest in community? Okay, what does that mean in terms of, does that mean one less coach? If we're going to spend 200 grand on community out in Casey, does that mean that our facilities aren't going to be quite as good? And they're all the trade-offs that we actually have to make in regard to it all. That decision making is held together by this framework, which is about good strategy, ensuring that we don't compromise our values, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but then also looking at the creed. And the creed is the way by which we actually articulate the heritage elements, if you like. Building and creating a profit model, as much as everyone loves the romance and all that, there's a pure pragmatic aspect of what we actually do. But it's giving yourself, the next phase is giving yourself a reference point from which we can actually make these trade-offs. And the framework which we utilise is called Horizons Modelling. A lot of people would have actually seen it. We've adapted, what is basically the model by which you have to deal with what you have to deal with today, but also look at what you have to try and create and build into the future in that sense. This is a really complex looking framework, but it is the fundamental framework which we utilise to drive our business, and I'll walk through it as we go through. It's a staircase model. It's quite deliberately pointing this way. The one thing you don't lack in an AFL club is advice and good ideas, okay? But we can't, it's that trade-off model again. You can't just say, gee, that's a good idea, let's do it. People come into an AFL club with all these great concepts and ideas, but a lot of the time you've got to go, hang on, all right, let's actually work our way through that, how that actually fits right now. And we're going through an interesting phase in regard to that. There's four key areas that we work off. We'll just stay on this side of it at the moment. The one word which isn't mentioned there once is membership. The one thing that people always talk, they want to know always. They want to know how many members you got, how many teams you got, how many games you're going to win, all these sorts of things. In the end, as we know, they are just the product of a million things. So what we do is we draw back off what are the key drivers within it all. And the frameworks we use are simply this. The first one is this notion of high performance with high integrity. And we talk about this all the time. We're a high-performance organisation right across the organisation. Ultimately, match day, how we perform on the day, is a high-performance thing. We elicit high performance from all of our people in everything that we do. We employ that many coaches, we employ that many experts, and we can attract really good people. That's one of the great strengths of an AFL club. But we have to do it with a sense of integrity. And integrity, in our case, and I'll work through each of these issues, is integrity to the heritage of the club, is integrity to the values of the organisation, is integrity to the people we employ, is integrity to the community from which we actually base ourselves and we operate within. And the community, perhaps the most important community, is the 18-year-old young men who we bring into our organisation, and we take them on a rocket ride in regard to their personal development at one level, but we leave behind some really important parts of their personal development, just the normal stuff of growing up, of which they miss out on. So how do we replace that, and how do we create that environment?